Sam, Friday night under the lights. How excited are you to get amongst the Hawthorn faithful at the MCG?
Yeah, I mean, great to have a big home game, the first chance for the Brown and Gold to come out and support us, all those that are based in Melbourne. And, I think over the last few years, they've actually done a great job of turning up for us. So I'm really excited. Hopefully we can get close to packing out the MCG on a Friday night to play the old rivals.
I imagine it was a pretty ideal start to the season last week. How do you back it up again this week?
I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? So, it's amazing how much, when there's only 2 games, how much gets spoken about your game. But for us, we know that was just one small step in the direction that we want to take. And, we've had enough evidence that we can improve when we work hard. And, big challenge this week. I think if you look at Essendon's form line, they were able to beat Geelong in Geelong pre-season. We played there as well. We weren't able to do that. So, they've played some really good footy. They've obviously had to change their prep with the change of their round 0 game as well. So, a bit of an unexpected prep for this game, but we know that we're going to have to play our best.
You just had one match up against them last year. Have you caught much of their pre-season, their practice matches?
Yeah, looked pretty closely. Dave McKay in particular, he obviously does a lot of opposition for us, and we feel like we've got a reasonable plan to execute, and if we can do that, we think that'll give us every chance. But they're a good side. They've played some really good footy, and I think they had some games they would have been disappointed with last year. But when you look at their form line across the whole year, and you look at their best, they were pretty potent, and they beat some really good sides when they were in good form. So they also lost a couple of games that perhaps they should have won. So I don't think Essendon are going to be a side that anyone's going to take lightly this year.
You touched on it just before, but obviously their first match was postponed. Is that, I guess, an advantage for you guys, given that their training loads are probably a bit out of whack?
Well, give me a few days and I'll let you know. I think the professionalism of every organisation now, their flexibility, the way that they can move around. I know that in other sports, moving fixtures happens all the time. So I'm sure they've had plenty to work on, and probably given them an extra week to work on some tactical things as far as training goes. And I don't think it'll give us too much of an advantage, but I hope it does.
Isaac Kako is going to debut for the Bombers. Last week you sent Josh Battle to Tom Papley. Do you send him to Isaac Kako? They're sort of similar players, I guess.
Yeah, his pre-season was so impressive, and obviously we watched him, in his under-18s, and he's an early draft pick and a highly talented small forward, and those guys can be really potent. So, congratulations to him on his first game, but I'm not going to give you too much about the matchups if I'm honest.
Obviously, James Walpole's going to miss the next month of footy. How big of a loss is he sort of to your midfield group?
Yeah, it's disappointing for him. He's been in fantastic form. I think he's been our best performing midfielder across the pre-season and started the game really well on the weekend. So to lose such a resilient player who's played so much footy for us is disappointing, but it creates opportunities. So we've got quite a few guys that we were disappointed had to miss out last week. So we'll go through some selection this afternoon and come up with the final team. But there's plenty of guys knocking on the door, and that's the challenge for the guys not in the side for every team is, can you put your best foot forward? And Box Hill had a good win last week. So there's a few guys that are ready.
Will Day had a massive game last week. How big is his pre-season then? Obviously, the disappointment of missing finals last year for you.
Yeah, Daisy's he's a super professional performer. He's had a lot of sort of impact injuries. It's not like he's been out for soft tissue or the ones that are slightly more controllable. I think with Daisy, you hope he can put together a full season, and he's giving himself every chance. I think the midfield group holistically don't rely on any individual. So the fact that he was able to perform really well in the first half, and then other players stepped up in the second half of the game to give us a pretty good performance was important. And I think when you look at Essendon, they've obviously got a couple of big names in their midfield, but if you look at their consistency all across their midfield as well, I think it'll be a pretty evenly matched group.
Daisy's first half was super impressive, but then he sort of got tagged in that second half. Do you expect Essendon to put some work into it this week to sort of control his influence?
We only control what we can control. Obviously, Daisy's going to get used to that at some point. I think Jai gets sat on, quite a bit. Same as James Sicily. So, there's going to be a few different matchups that, guys have to deal with, and that might mean that they influence the game in a different way. Perhaps they don't influence it in the way that might help the dream teamers as much. But so long as they're playing a role for the team and helping us win, then so long as they're getting rewarded by our internal sort of metrics, then they're going to be pretty happy. And I thought Daisy's second half was not as statistically good, but I thought he had close to as much influence on the team and the way we were able to play.
You touched on the VFL before. CJ played a couple of minutes over the weekend. Is he available this week?
Yeah, I mean, technically he's available, but he's still coming. He's still building himself up. So probably him and Luke Bruce are the two that were a little bit slower through this later part of the pre-season. So they're still building their minutes, and while they're available, they're probably not likely to play full minutes at the moment. So they're decisions that we'll make, with the sub and all those things as we go forward through the rest of the week.
Obviously, you played on the big stage hundreds of times throughout your career. From a player point of view, is there a difference playing, I guess, on an early Sunday afternoon compared to Friday night, as you're about to do, in front of a packed MCG?
I mean, there shouldn't be. They're all worth 4 points, aren't they? But I think the challenge of playing in big games, in big pressure, is what you make it. And our group's been really strong and really consistent with we want to be in big games, we want to be in big moments, and we're playing against Essendon, who are a huge club, with a fantastic history, and the history between the two clubs is obviously significant. So a lot of Hawks fans, a lot of Bombers fans, perhaps aren't in love with each other too much. So that'll start to ebb away over the next 48 hours. But Friday night footy at the MCG against the Bombers, I think I'd like to be there.
Are you the type of coach to remind the boys the history, or do you need to pump them up, or do you sort of...
I'm not sure yet. I haven't thought that far ahead. I think the players will be ready for the game, and my job is to prepare them for it. And if I don't think that they understand the history, then maybe do a little bit of a lesson. But I think most of our guys are pretty well educated on it.